Elon Musk claims to have found billions of dollars of government fraud, waste, and abuse. But on closer inspection, almost all of his claims turned out to be products of Elon's own ignorance. Now, everyone on the planet is in favor of increased governmental efficiency, but the problem is that fraud, waste, and abuse are harder to find than you might think. So much so that there are senior government officials called inspectors general who run entire teams of independent watchdogs with public accountability. Unfortunately, Donald Trump fired most of them in one of his first acts in his second term. And it's particularly important to have federal employees dig into claims of fraud because generally you can't find it by simply looking at a spreadsheet of payments. So when Elon Musk and his DOGE bros claimed that they found billions of dollars of fraud by looking at a spreadsheet of payments, we were skeptical. And our skepticism paid off because it turns out, to a first-order approximation, they didn't find any fraud. Now, Musk and Trump may disagree with the federal spending priorities set by Congress, but the spending set by Congress is the law. So categorically, if spending certain funds is required by congressional appropriation, it can't be fraud. But that hasn't stopped Musk and DOGE from doubling down on their wild claims. So it turns out they did find fraud. Maybe the real fraud was the fraud they made up along the way. Chaos lawyer Liz Dye explains.
Thanks, Devin. After the election, Donald Trump announced the creation of the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, to dismantle government bureaucracy, slash excess regulations, cut wasteful expenditures, and restructure federal agencies. At the time, he promised that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy would provide advice and guidance from outside of the government and partner with the White House Office of Management and Budget to drive large-scale structural reform and create an entrepreneurial approach to government never seen before. But it was not meant to be. First, Ramaswamy was sent packing off to Ohio, and then, within hours of being sworn in on January 20th, Trump signed an executive order renaming the Department of Digital Services the Department of Government Efficiency. Essentially, he skin-suited DOGE into an existing agency like some kind of alien body snatcher. The Department of Digital Services was originally tasked with improving user experience on government websites, and that first executive order sort of pretended that there was an overlap between the missions. It said that DOGE would be responsible for modernizing federal technology and software to maximize governmental efficiency and productivity. Although it did hint at what was to come by referring to a team of DOGE dudes, which was to be dispatched to each government agency and given access to all non-classified databases. What followed was nothing less than a wholesale takeover of the government by Elon Musk and his DOGE bros as they colonized one federal agency after another and either shut them down or radically downsized them by firing tens of thousands of government employees. In February, the president dropped all pretense that DOGE was about modernization. In a second executive order, he mandated that 4 federal workers be fired for every 1 new hire, and he gave the DOGE liaison to each federal agency the power to veto all hiring decisions. Since then, the DOGE bros have slashed through the government while the agency's Twitter account posts nonstop about all the woke contracts it's canceling. It is not legal for the president or his billionaire buddy to arbitrarily cancel contracts and congressionally allocated spending, but that's the subject for another video. Today, we're going to talk about math, specifically how believing everything you see on the internet makes you bad at it. On January 28th, in her first appearance at the podium, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt claimed that DOGE had discovered that the government was spending $50 million to buy condoms from Gaza.
DOGE and OMB also found that there was about to be 50 million taxpayer dollars that went out the door to fund condoms in Gaza. That is a preposterous waste of taxpayer money.
Musk called it the tip of the iceberg and said, "My guess is that a lot of that money ended up in the pockets of Hamas, not actually condoms." That story was utter nonsense. The entire population of Gaza before the latest war was only 2 million people. As multiple news organizations have pointed out, USAID, the government's vehicle for distributing humanitarian assistance, spent $0 on condoms in the entire Middle East in 2024, with only about $7 million for condoms worldwide. And we have to show you those articles instead of the original source material because DOGE yanked down USAID's website, including the tables that showed what the agency spent in prior years. But as Jeremy Kanindick, the president of Refugees International and a former official at USAID, AP noted on Twitter, what's going on here is not a billion condoms for Gaza. What's going on is that the bros at DOGE can't read government spreadsheets. He called it the kind of basic mistake you make when you've fired half the workforce of the Global Health Bureau and pushed out much of the senior leadership. Pressed for evidence of the $50 million claim, State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce tweeted that the across-the-board pause in foreign assistance, quote, allowed the State Department to prevent unjustified and non-emergency spending, such as condoms, prevented $102 million in unjustified funding to a contractor in Gaza, including money for contraception. There was, again, no evidence for this claim. And as Kanindic pointed out, it would be entirely appropriate for the U.S. government to purchase condoms and other birth control as part of its humanitarian funding. President Trump then doubled the figure to $100 million.
Think of it, $100 million on condoms to Hamas.
Some media outlets have suggested that the DOGE bros got confused between the Gaza Strip, which is home to millions of Palestinians, and Gaza Province in Mozambique. As the Washington Post points out, the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation received $83 million from the Department of Health and Human Services Department for HIV/AIDS Prevention in Gaza Province, although none of that went to buy condoms. That did not stop Fox News' Jesse Waters from insisting on air that the U.S. government was paying for condom bombs.
They make condom bombs. Hamas inflates the condoms, straps on an explosive, and floats them into Israel. It's a dual-use technology. Looks like a Hamas birthday party. So we pay for the Hamas condom bombs and Israel's Iron Dome.
None of that was remotely true. As far as we can tell, it's just completely made up. But here's Musk brushing off the criticism in the Oval Office.
That's what you say.
Well, first of all, some of the things that I say will be incorrect and should be corrected. So nobody's going to bat 1,000. I mean, we will make mistakes, but we'll act quickly to correct it.
Again, we did not spend $50 million on condoms, and if we had, it wouldn't be appropriate or legal for some unelected billionaire to simply cancel that allocation out based on his own sense that it's a bad idea. But that was not the only incidence of Musk math leading to bizarre and often outright false claims about the federal budget.
Now, sorry to interrupt, but if you're going to accuse the government of fraud, you'll want a good lawyer. But if you want a great lawyer, my law firm, the Eagle Team, can help. If you've gotten in a car crash, suffered a data breach, especially if you got one of those data breach letters saying your information might have been leaked, or dealing with a workers' comp or social security issue, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney. It's so important to talk to a lawyer right away so you can maximize your recovery. And by the way, we don't get paid unless you do, so there's nothing up front. So just click on the link in the description or call the phone number on screen for a free consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle Team.
During that gonzo Oval Office press conference, Musk claimed to have found billions of dollars of Social Security fraud. The allegation that there were thousands of fake 150-year-old people collecting Social Security checks rocketed through the MAGA ecosystem. Here's the president's son, Don Jr., tweeting, "OMG, it's so bad what's been happening to our country and your money." But people who actually understand code immediately spotted the error. The tip-off is that Musk thinks all those fake Social Security accounts are for people who are 150 years old, i.e. born in 1875. See, a lot of the data that Musk's whiz-kid coders have been rifling through was written in the last century. There are a lot of reasons for this, but chief among them is money, because it's expensive to modernize enormous data systems, particularly when, like Social Security, they absolutely, positively cannot break down or leak. And Congress is never interested in appropriating millions of dollars to revitalize data processing systems, so it always gets pushed off to the next year, which means that the management protocols for U.S. government financial data are very old and very fragile. That's part of why people were freaking out about the DOGE dudes getting into Treasury's payment processing system, because it would be very easy to break it by accident, and breaking it would be catastrophic because it would grind the entire government payment system to a halt. Anyway, in 1988, long before most of the DOGE programmers were even born, the International Organization for Standardization tried to regularize the notation for dates. Take, as an example, this number. Americans read that as February 10th. For more or less everyone else, it's October 2nd. Now, you guys can argue in the comments about who's right here, but for the purposes of international banking transaction, it matters that everyone is on the same page. So in 1988, we all agreed that the international standard would be an 8-digit number comprising the year, month, and day. That standard was called ISO 8601, and under it, February 10th, 2025 is rendered as 20250210, the world over. No more confusion. But for reasons you don't care about having to do with the Gregorian calendar, under ISO 8601, we all agreed to treat May 20th, 1875 as the year zero. That's the date when the Treaty of Metro was signed at the First International Convention to establish the International Bureau of Weights and Measures in Paris, and I guess that seemed like as good a date as any. But I'm sure we all see where this is going, because the government's payment processing systems at the Department of Treasury's Bureau of Fiscal Services runs on a 65-year-old computer programming language called COBOL. And COBOL utilizes the ISO 8601 standard, meaning that if there's nothing in the birth date field, it will render as the earliest date acknowledged by the system 18750520. So, if anyone of any age has a missing birthday, the system will show her as born on May 20th, 1875. And a person who doesn't know what he's looking at is going to see that as showing a Social Security recipient who's 150 years old. Which is very funny if you're a computer programmer, but not so funny if you're watching your government be disassembled by a deranged billionaire. But Musk was not done. On February 16th, he discovered that 83% of Social Security recipients were fraudulent, tweeting, "Maybe Twilight is real and there are a lot of vampires collecting Social Security." Trump immediately parroted the claim that there were millions of fraudulent Social Security recipients.
From 200 to 209 years old, 879 people. From 210 years old, I haven't met any of them. And if I did, I would bless them. I would worship the ground they walk on.
I have no idea where Musk got that chart. He did not say. But there are roughly 71 million Social Security recipients in the United States and roughly 60 million Americans over the age of 65, almost all of whom are Social Security eligible, which doesn't even take into account all the widows, orphans, and disabled people who collect Social Security benefits. There just are not enough people for there to be tens of millions of fraudulent recipients. That's not a thing. In another recent episode, Musk tweeted, "The DOGE team just discovered that FEMA sent $59 million last week to luxury hotels in New York City to house illegal migrants. Sending this money violated the law and is in gross insubordination to the president's executive order. That money is meant for American disaster relief and instead is being spent on high-end hotels for illegals." Literally none of that was true. In fact, the Federal Emergency Management Agency sent almost $81 million to the city of New York on February 6th as part of its obligation under the law to support communities hosting large numbers of asylum seekers and migrants released from federal custody. The city used $19 million to pay itself back for money already spent to house migrants in accordance with the federal grant. Those immigrants are being housed in multiple locations, including the Roosevelt Hotel, a once famous but now decidedly dilapidated building in Midtown that the city uses as a migrant shelter and central processing hub.
It was just over a year ago when the Roosevelt Hotel became New York City's intake center for newly arriving migrants.
The city does not put migrants up in luxury hotels. In fact, is paying an average of $156 a night per room, a decidedly non-luxury rate for New York City. And contrary to what Musk said, that money was not supposed to be spent on disaster relief. It was part of a $650 million congressional allocation to FEMA's Shelter and Service Program. In short, the money was being used exactly as Congress directed in its 2023 and 2024 budget bills. And lest we forget, budget bills are laws. The president cannot unilaterally suspend them, and neither can Elon Musk. Nevertheless, Musk tweeted that a clawback demand will be made today to recoup those funds, and Cameron Hamilton, the acting administrator of FEMA, raced to make it happen. He tweeted, "I want to thank the DOGE team for making me aware of this. Effective yesterday, those payments have all been suspended from FEMA. Personnel will be held accountable. Congress should have never passed bills in 2023 and 2024 asking FEMA to do this work. This stops now." It is not normal for a public official to say, "Yes, these are laws passed by Congress instructing me to do a thing, but guess what? I'm not going to do it," which is why Hamilton said something different in court. See, a federal judge in Rhode Island already barred the government from cutting any grants or contracts outside the regular agency review process. And after Musk and Hamilton announced their intent to do just that, the Justice Department filed an emergency motion asking the court to allow it to cut funds to New York City. In his declaration to the court, Hamilton did not say that he was clawing back the grant money because New York was using disaster relief to put migrants up in luxury hotels. Instead, he claimed that, according to media reports, the vicious Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua has taken over the hotel and is using it as a recruiting center and base of operations to plan a variety of crimes. That claim was sourced to a New York Post article derived mainly from Spanish-language TikToks. Hamilton made no claim to have investigated those rumors. He did not refer to any violation by the city of New York, which would have invalidated the grant, and he did not tell the court that he engaged in the months-long process set out in federal regulations to recoup improperly used grant funds. Instead, he said he'd paused funding quickly in this matter to protect that funding from the potential for its misuse for the illegal activity described. But the judge refused to sign the government's permission slip. He said basically, if what you're doing is legal, then you don't need my permission, and if it's not legal, I can't give it to you. And of course, it wasn't legal. Federal regulations require an audit, 60 days notice, an appeal mechanism, and allowing the grant recipient to make repayment arrangements. Here, the government just reversed an $80 million payment, most of which had nothing to do with the Roosevelt Hotel, and stole the money. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem fired the civil servants who put the transaction through, as they were required to do by law, calling them FEMA deep state activists, and promised that there will not be a single penny spent that goes against the interest and safety of the American people. But again, the American people spoke when they elected their representatives to Congress, which sets the budget. That's how our constitutional system goes. And the fact that Elon Musk believes crazy things, either because he sees them on the internet or because the DOGE Jews don't know what they're looking at, does not change the law. Elon Musk and his Doge bros put out so many fake stories it can be hard to keep track of them all. He and his millions of followers spent several news cycles discovering that media outlets were secretly funded by agencies like USAID. I think the theory here is that federal agencies which make policy decisions and have to liaise with Congress should not pay for subscriptions to the New York Times and the Washington Post and Politico Pro, which are essential reading for everyone in D.C. I guess the less information, the better. On February 12th, Reuters published a story entitled "Musk's Doge Cuts Based More on Political Ideology Than Real Cost Savings So Far." The story noted correctly that Musk was going after programs that conservatives dislike, such as public television and programs that support diversity. But those represent a minuscule fraction of the federal budget and will not get close to the $2 trillion in spending cuts Musk has promised to find. After Director Ron Howard posted the Reuters piece, Musk replied, "I wonder how much money Reuters is getting from the government. Let's find out." A crypto bro named Mario Nawfal raced to produce the desired data, which wasn't difficult since you and I and everyone else can go to usaspending.gov and plug in any recipient we like. Nawfal pointed to a contract from 2018, when Trump was still president, for, quote, active social engineering defense and large-scale social deception. He said, DOGE investigations reveal mysterious Defense Department payments to Reuters for large-scale social deception project between 2018 and 2022. While DARPA claims it was for cyber defense, questions swirl about why a news agency received millions for social engineering. In fact, questions did not swirl, or at least not until Nawfal started swirling them. Because you too can click through and see the November 2017 proposal soliciting innovative research proposals in the area of automated defense against social engineering attacks, which Nawfal must have done himself since he knew that the proposal originated from DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. But that did not matter to Musk, who immediately tweeted, Reuters was paid millions of dollars by the US government for large-scale social deception. That is literally what it says on the purchase order. They're a total scam. And it didn't matter to the president either. The reality is that Thomson Reuters is a huge company with a news division that is totally separate from its research division, and DOGE didn't discover this contract. It was on a public website, and some internet rando tweeted it at Musk along with a totally misleading suggestion, which Musk and Trump were both delighted to treat as fact. Anyway, thanks to this hard-hitting investigation, the Securities and Exchange Commission has now canceled its subscription to Westlaw, the legal research database relied on by every lawyer in America, because it happens to be owned by Reuters. In reality, though, the Reuters article that made Musk mad in the first place was dead right. The things that DOGE is cutting are a minuscule fraction of the federal budget. In that Oval Office press conference on February 11th, Trump crowed that DOGE had found tens of billions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse to cut, mostly by perusing usaspending.gov, apparently. But the Washington Post ran the numbers. And even if you take DOGE at its word, their math does not add up, because $1 trillion is a really big number. And if you're promising $500 billion worth of savings from cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, a few $1 million here or there will not cut it. For instance, DOGE says pennies cost more than 3 cents to mint, so the government can save $179 million a year by eliminating the penny, which might be true, although I'd note that getting rid of pennies means we're going to need a lot more nickels, which cost 14 cents a piece to make. And like Reuters said, most of the DOGE cuts so far have been to projects to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, which might add up to a few $1 billion across the entire federal government, but is relatively speaking a drop in the bucket. Even the purported $881 million in cuts to the Department of Education do not get anywhere near that $500 billion Trump promised. You can eke out $1 million by getting rid of the non-binary gender marker X on all government documents, and you can axe an exhibit on Dr. Anthony Fauci at the Museum of National Institutes of Health and save $168,000. But that's more of a middle finger to people you don't like than actual budget policy. The Washington Post tallied the DOGE cuts through February 12th and came up with a total of $6 billion, of which judges have already blocked $4 billion in cuts to medical and scientific research. That is not $500 billion. It is not even tens of billions of dollars, as Musk and Trump promised. And even if Trump and Musk get their way and fire vast swaths of the federal workforce, it's not going to get them where they say they want to go. Because, as the Brookings Institution points out, 60% of the federal workforce is at the Department of Defense, Veterans Affairs, and the Department of Homeland Security. Trump promised not to cut any staff at those departments, although he's already fired 1,000 people at the VA, so who knows? They also fired and then had to rehire more than 300 workers who managed the National Nuclear Stockpile. Oops. But if you leave aside those 3 agencies, the payroll for the entire rest of the federal government is just $108 billion. So you could cut 1 in 3 federal workers, and it would still only save you $35 billion. A recent investigation by the New York Times of a purported $8 billion contract canceled by DOGE revealed that the real number was just $8 million. The Times notes that after the article was published, DOGE removed the screenshot that showed the mismatch, but continued to claim $8 billion in savings. It added a link to the original incorrect version of the listing, showing an $8 billion value. It later updated the link to reflect the correct number, but failed to subtract the $7.992 billion from the supposed $55 billion tally of the cuts it claims to have made so far. And by the by, the Times says that they didn't find this error by going through the whole list. They just picked the biggest number and investigated that one first. But the DOGE defenders have a good answer for that, and it's, what are you trying to hide? You must be mad because we found all this corruption.
When they want to audit USAID, who is spending $100 million to send condoms to Gaza, let alone running shrimp on treadmill and all the other ridiculous things. The Democrats go crazy. Let them do this, Sean.
Reasonable people can argue about small government versus big government and the appropriate use of tax dollars, but that's not the issue here. Leave aside the dubious legality of almost everything DOGE has done, violating everything from civil service protections to the Appropriations Clause to the Impoundment Control Act. That's going to be for judges to sort out. The issue is that none of the numbers these guys are throwing around will get you anywhere near $500 billion or $2 trillion or whatever made-up figure they throw out tomorrow. That math just ain't mathin'. Although, if your goal is to hollow out the federal government and make sure that it can never deliver services that Americans have come to rely on, this plan ought to do it.